In this video, we are going to learn how to estimate population proportion by using confidence intervals. So first, our problem we have in New York City on October 23rd, 2014, a doctor who had recently been treating Ebola patients in Guinea went to the hospital with a slight fever and was subsequently diagnosed with Ebola. Soon thereafter, a poll found that 82% of New Yorkers favored mandatory 21-day quarantine for anyone who has come into contact with an Ebola patient. This poll included responses of 1,042 New York adults between October 26 and 28, 2014. We want to estimate the proportion of New York adults who supported a quarantine for anyone who has come in contact with these Ebola patients. And our alpha will be 0.05. So first off, we need to figure out what type of problem this is. So if you look at our problem, we want to estimate the proportion. So proportion, that gives us our keyword there. And also it told us we have 82% and a total of 1,042. So we have percentage here that leads us to believe it's proportion, also out of 1042, and then it tells us we want to estimate the proportion. So we're working with a proportion problem here. So for our best estimate is going to be our sample proportion p hat. So I'm going to write down our sample proportion will be p hat. And in this case, it told us that from our sample poll, there was 82%. So p hat will be 0.82. So that was step one. We found that we needed a proportion. Step two, we have our best estimate. That's our p hat. And then we need to find our x and our n values. So for n, that's just our total. Told us our total was 1,042. 1,042. And then our x value we need to find. So our x value is the number of successes, so we're going to have to do 0.82 times our total, and that'll figure out how many people out of that 1042 agree for the quarantine. So that'll give us about 854. And we want these to be a whole number, so I'm just going to round it down to 854. If it was higher than 0.4, we would round it up. So then we have our p hat, we have our x, and we have our n. The last thing we need is our confidence interval. So if alpha is 0.05, that means our sides here have 5%, which means the middle has 95%. So we have a 95% confidence interval, so that's what we're looking for there, 95%. So we have our best estimate is 0.82. So what we're looking for is our interval that's going to be centered at 0.82. Remember, this is our margin of error, and that'll create our confidence interval. So the sample mean is always going to be exactly in the center of our interval. So now that we have all of this, we can go into StatCrunch, and we're going to put all this in. So we have stat, and this one we are doing in proportions, so we're going to go to proportion stats, and we have one sample, and we just have our summary here. So we're going to use our summary. If you had a data set in StatCrunch, then you would use with data. So I'm going to use a summary. And we have our number of successes was our x, we found was 854. Our number of observations was our n, which is 1,042. And then we want confidence interval, so I'm going to click on confidence interval, and we have 95%, so that's good. So once you have all of that plugged in, we're going to hit compute. And this gives us our confidence interval from 0.796 to 0.843. So our confidence interval, I'll write down, is 0.796 to 0.843. Changing these to percentages to make for our interpretation. This means that, going back to our original problem, this tells us that the true proportion of New York adults who supported a quarantine for anyone who has come into contact with an Ebola patient is between 0.796 and 0.843. If we want to change that to percentages, it would be 79.6% to 84.3%. So our final conclusion, we are 95% confident that the true proportion of New York adults who supported a quarantine for anyone who has come in contact with an Ebola patient is between 79.6 and 84.3%. So when you're doing these problems, the most important thing is first pick out, are we looking for proportion? Are we looking for a mean? Are we looking for a standard deviation? This one was proportion. Then you're going to pick out your x and your n values. So we had our percentage here, was our p hat. We had our x, we had to find, we had our n, we had to find our x. And then once you have all of those and your level of confidence, put it into StatCrunch and then make sure you interpret. So that is how you create confidence intervals to estimate population proportions in StatCrunch.